Well, good morning, Robert.
Good morning, Joe.
And Robert, you're the head of Simplified Strategic Planning, which is a firm that works with companies help them to get more strategic and align kind of the executives and the management team around a common purpose. Is that right?
Pretty much. We do a very formatted, structured strategic planning program that's extremely efficient. That's designed for small to mid-sized companies, although it's used by much larger companies too.
Okay, well, I've run a little firm called Sandler Training in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I've worked with companies. I worked with your company going on what, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah,
Uh,
correct.
but I've worked with over 500 companies, mostly the same demographic, small to medium size, probably up to, 50, 5 to 50 million dollar companies is really my sweet spot. But I
Hmm.
occasionally work with some large companies like General Motors. You might have heard of them. Thomson Reuters. But generally, my sweet spot is working with smaller companies to help them to bring a process to their sales function because it's usually an afterthought. Most companies hire salespeople or sales managers and say, "Okay, now go sell," and and that's about the extent of their management of the sales function. So I come in and help them build out a culture, a system to do that.
Hmm.
So your website says there's three key questions, Robert, in strategic planning. What to sell, who to sell to, and how can you beat the competition? Which of those are most important?
Well, they're kind of interlocked, and the first two are usually very much decisions. Like if you haven't decided exactly who you're selling to and exactly what you're selling them, what the value is, the third question, how you beat or avoid competition, is going to be very, very difficult.
Mm.
But how you beat or avoid competition can over time drive modifications and evolution in what you sell or in who you sell to, as you recognize that the way you do things is superior to other companies for certain customers in certain applications.
Okay, so can you get two out of the three right and still kick butt? Or
I have worked with companies that have gotten two out of the three right, and that the third one has been our struggle in strategic planning because and usually is because we have a vision at the executive level, and
Hmm.
operationally there might be a vision about how we're going to beat the competition. And we have a really good product defined, but we turn the sales force loose and they just want to sell to everyone because they get a 5 or 10% commission on sales. And hey, if I could just land this one big customer, then I'd really make hay this year.
in my experience is they often come back and say, we don't have everything we need to sell. Is that fair?
Right. And then in strategic planning, they say, well, we want to add this and we want to add this and we want to add this. And it gets very expensive, and the company's profits start to drift downward when that happens because you're not doing the right thing for any one customer.
It's kind of a reactionary approach to a reactive, organic approach to how your product mix and customer mix develop. Is that fair to say?
Yes, yes. And I think, it's okay to listen to customers, but it's important to have a process where you can be intentional about which customers you're listening to, because there are great customers and there are terrible customers.
Mm.
And some salespeople just never get that.
So, big picture, Robert, what would you want to know about my business?
So your business strikes me. I mean, it's very process oriented, which I like because I think, I really focus on the strategic planning process. It seems to you focus on processes around sales and also leadership. And I don't know if it's specifically sales leadership, but there's a big piece to that you do, and you do those things very well. So the thing I'm curious about is when you start working with a company on, improving their sales process, how do you bring that kind of intentionality, that strategic view into the sales management processes?
Well, the first step is to really get a good picture, do some diligence on what is the current process, because everybody has a process, even if it's organically grown, and inefficient and ineffective. And so I just dive into, how they're selling today, from initial contact with a prospect to ultimate closure, and even post-closure into delivery of product or services. And then once I get a clear picture of that, I can usually identify where there's dysfunction, or at least sequential broken process where, log jams happen, or areas where it comes unraveled with a particular customer. And then that usually helps me discern, well, what do we need to work on? What skill sets, and how long and difficult a process it's going to be to develop. And then, sometimes it's a matter of tweaking and getting a few of the sales employees up to speed on how to execute certain processes, like, for example, prospecting. Then sometimes it's going deep, where we work with them on every step of the process and help them get mastery of the skill sets to execute.
Mhm. Since we worked with you years ago, and that work helped us an awful lot, I'm wondering, has technology changed the approach that you take, or is it just a tool that you use to amplify the processes?
Yeah, I mean, most of the technology that's been developed for sales, like, the proliferation of different CRM programs like Salesforce and Goldmine and Zoho and HubSpot. Most of those programs are very helpful tools, but they don't really replace building a culture that sells within a company. So I think one of the biggest challenges when I meet with a customer is they're often at that decision point. Do I invest in technology first, or do I invest in my people and building out the culture first? And I would obviously argue the latter is probably the first step. Because if you don't have a selling culture, you're the repository for all the information your sales team is gathering is not really much of a tool. And so I help them to build out their culture, the process, get everybody up to speed on what are the standards to strive for, and then the technology is an aid for them to perpetuate that, keep it going.
So one thing that occurs to me when you say that is, I imagine you must sometimes see situations where they do buy the technology first, and that technology, the CRM they're using, really starts to define their culture and their processes, not necessarily in a good way that's helpful for the company.
What's interesting about that was what often happens is that CRM becomes a collection of fiction, where the sales team feels obligated to enter something, and maybe they're not really skilled in execution, so they feel like they have to fill it with a lot of, let's just say, padded information. And then the technology really isn't an aid at all. It's just we call it constructive avoidance tool. It's a tool to constructively avoid maybe the thing they don't have the skill to do, like prospecting.
So when that happens, if they put in really accurate numbers, sometimes maybe their fear is, my manager or the CEO is going to get really freaked out because the numbers don't look good based on this, but it's accurate. And so they put in the numbers that they think their manager wants to see.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not nefarious. It isn't because they're being purposefully dishonest. It's that we call it happy ears. A lot of salespeople will hear from a customer or prospective customer, "Yeah, Robert, this looks great. I think we'll be doing something." And they don't hear the "I think" part of that sentence. And they put it in their pipeline as if it's a 90% probability. And that's where the fiction comes from. They want to believe that, they've heard something positive from a prospect, so that they think it's real, and they say, well, now I got something else to put in my pipeline to make it look better to my boss.
Yeah, and that kind of insane optimism is a characteristic I find shared by salespeople and CEOs. They
Oh,
both like believe the best of everything, and then they get very upset when it doesn't turn out the way they expect it to. So you kind of have to shepherd them back to reality. How do you do that?
well, again, it's about not being a facilitator or enabler of that kind of thinking. I have to be pretty harsh about it initially to make sure that people come to terms with the fact that a lot of the things, I mean, they know historically. I mean, if something's rolled over on their monthly meeting is a 90% probability prospect, for 3, 4, or 5 months, they start to sense it isn't real. And so it's about calling it out and saying, look, you know, uh, these are all the 90% or 50% probability prospects you loaded in your pipeline the last year, and 1 out of 50 of them came through. What's up with that? And then it's about dissecting each and helping them to see where they were delusional about the probability of those prospects. So
Yeah, and I
I have to kind of get up to my elbows in that stuff with
yeah.
individuals, managers, as well as the salespeople to get them to realize it.
Yeah. Well, and culturally, it's a delicate dance because you want to test their thinking, right? You want them to be critical in their thinking, but you don't want to get down on them so they feel criticized
Right.
and just
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
because you need that optimism to be a salesperson.
Yeah, and you need to be an encourager, and that's something I really strive for when I work with a firm. Is I'm not there to beat them up and tell them how incompetent they are. I'm there to help them to see where they may be wasting their time and how I can show them that through a process and maybe a little bit more of a jaundiced eye as they look at
Mhm.
prospects, they can buy back a bunch of time and they can sell a lot more without beating them or killing themselves doing it. And so that's kind of that's the prize for it. And the pain that the manager feels about these fudge loaded pipelines is that they can't forecast. They get this
Right.
data, this accumulated data from their team that looks like the next quarter is going to be banner, and then they get into the next quarter and it doesn't happen, and they're going, whoa, how do I change this? And so that's their incentive to get the guys to see things clearly. And honestly, some people fall out because some people just can't step up to being a more assertive, effective salesperson. And it's probably the best thing for them as well that they go find another role, maybe in the company or somewhere else. Because I think if you keep somebody on that doesn't fit the role, it's not just bad for the company or the department, it's bad for the
Oh, yeah.
person.
Yes, I think nobody's getting any favors when that happens. I see the problem gets deeper than that strategically. In strategic planning, I wrestle with this information because you have to have agreed upon information just to set a course for the business.
Well, let
And
me
if the
let me ask you about that. Is it often the case that they call you in to help a team with and they have different ideas, and it's really about how to help them come to consensus on what the strategy should be?
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of my real strengths, I'm told, is that the process that I use in strategic planning gets everybody's perspective on the table, and then we weigh those perspectives against objective facts. But also I tend to use a little bit of a Socratic method where if somebody puts something up that I think might be nonsense, I start to ask questions about and say, hey, how can you tell this customer is real? How can you tell this customer loves us? How can you tell that people in this market segment really think we're great? Because I know I'm going to hear that. And so it's not pushback. I'm just asking for what is our evidence so that we can be critical about the quality of the information we look at.
So how do you discern about which team members' ideas for strategy are the best to recommend for a direction for them to take?
Well, the way we do that in the strategic planning process is that I ask for people from different sides of a question to give their reasoning. And I have a framework for that where I say, look, it's got to be short. Give me maybe 3 points of why this is a good idea or why this is a bad idea. And then I ask for some discussion about each of the points and what evidence supports each of them. And then after we've had that discussion, I say, look, we're going to have to make a decision here. It seems to me we got enough people from different perspectives in the room that we are evaluating this probably pretty well. So why don't we just just take a vote on it and see what comes up. And if there is a compromise that can be made, that's the thing I have to look at is, if somebody says, look, I think this is a 5, and someone else says, I think this is a 7, I say, would you guys be equally uncomfortable if we just said it was a 6?
I get it.
And there's a lot of that. Yeah.
So it's building consensus, and it's kind of a guided discovery process, since you're using Socratic questioning to get them maybe sympathize with others' perspectives, even if they don't totally agree with it.
Absolutely. And, I think part of my job is I always view that there are these 3 points. There's like a triangle that represents the realities of business faces. There's the market reality. Customers won't buy things they don't want at prices they won't pay, right?
Mm.
There's an operational reality. You can't sell something if you can't do it or make it. And then there's a financial reality. If you sell something for less than it costs you to make it, you're going to get in trouble. And those realities all struggle with each other. They push against each other. And in the beginning of the strategic planning process, I usually see there's somebody with a sales or market perspective and an operational perspective, a financial perspective, and they're just fighting with each other because they think the other guy is just stupid.
Yeah.
And they're not stupid. They just have a different perspective and a different motivation. Yeah. So my job is to bring those perspectives a little closer together to create a tighter structure around the strategic thinking of the organization.
And start to make it objective to all three of those interested parties.
Yes.
What's the reality if we compare each role?
Yes. The thing I find fascinating about this is the way we do this documents each step of that process of getting the knowledge and then building agreement on the knowledge. So later on, if, for example, your board of directors goes to the CEO and says, why did you make this choice? You've got backup that's a mile deep that says, we made this choice because we decided this and this, and then we made that decision based on this information. And you have far more information than that board member actually wants to hear. So it's for larger companies with an active board, it's a godsend.
Right. Well, let's shift gears a little bit. You brought up technology in your question to me a moment ago, Robert. I'm interested. HubSpot, I just read an article, lists in their top 10 sales challenges, number 2, how to balance the use of artificial intelligence. What are you telling your clients about AI, if anything?
Well, I think in sales and marketing areas, AI can be helpful, but I think it is a bright, shiny toy right now for a lot of people.
It is the buzzword of the day.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I just this week, I had a conversation with someone who was redoing the company's marketing message. And they just said, I fed this all through AI, and these are the messages they came out with. And I just looked at it and said, my biggest question is, the one thing they were showing me was something they were sharing with existing customers. And I said, this sounds like a lot of hype and it's very salesy sounding, right?
Yeah.
And somebody who's an existing customer doesn't need that. They already know you. They already like you enough to buy from you. Why can't you talk more humanly about the real connection, the real value you're bringing them without being so buzzy about it? And AI has a tendency to really amp up the buzziness because that's what, they're digesting stuff off the web, and websites tend to be very into pumping up, overblowing things.
Yeah, it's like a commercial on TV. How much do you really listen to the messages on TV?
Yes.
In fact, half the time you throw the mute button on as soon as the ad comes on. So yeah, and I think the technology, it's caused us to move further and further apart from that personal connection with our customers. And I think that's the challenge with all the technologies, is that, for example, the Zoom that we're on right now, there's no replacement for face-to-face in the room interaction with other human beings. And it is a practical solution for me in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and you in wherever you are today.
I'm in Vermont.
Oh, you're in
Yeah.
Vermont. Okay, you're not in Abu Dhabi today. Okay.
Nope, not today.
Okay. But I mean that, so there's a practical reason for it, but it does separate us. And AI is just another, can be a lazy replacement for more genuine communication with our customers, I think.
Yes. There's an impetus everyone has in business and perhaps in life. We would all love if there were just a button you could push and then whatever you wanted would come out. And the reality is and certainly in our work, you're dealing with people, and salespeople are dealing with people, and executives are dealing with people, and employees are people. And if you treat them like a machine that has a button on it, you're going to get in trouble. And there are very predictable ways you'll cause issues with employees or customers or anyone else if you push it in that machine direction. And I think we tend to do that in larger companies as they get bigger. They want to do that more and more. They want to treat every employee as if they were stamped out of a cookie cutter. And that's where culture becomes a really important element. And you mentioned sales culture. Culture in general is how do we treat everyone like human beings and at the same time have a really good motivation around getting done the things we want to get done.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to what's between our ears. If you think about it, I mean, our attitude shapes everything, shapes our world. And if we have as a company an attitude of abundance, we'll find abundance. If we have an attitude of scarcity, we're not going to find much at all. And I think the one of the challenges I face is one of the HubSpot listed items is the misalignment between sales and marketing in companies. Do you encounter that?
Yeah. Yes, all the time. I find that in general, in strategic planning, there is a conflict there. And sometimes the salespeople think the strategic planning is going to be the deliverance. And sometimes the marketing people think that, but always, there's a different view. The marketing people are, we have to reach this position where customers just flow to us. It's like gravity, like a ball rolling down a hill. And salespeople are like, no, we got to go out there. We got to, beat our competition. We got to get it done. And, that stuff that's not going to be useful to me this quarter, it's going to be useful in 5 years. And
one of the things that is born out of my involvement with companies and their selling culture is to make sure that marketing messaging is consistent with how we're sending our salespeople out to market. And so that, for example, the bullet points on the website or on a MailChimp or constant contact message is something that really prompts a customer to want to talk to the salespeople, as opposed to, like you said, you just mentioned a minute ago, that we want a button. We want to be able to our sales guys to just show up and throw up with their features and benefits, and that's going to turn into customers. And that's not the reality of it. People want to do business with human beings. They don't want to do business with stuffed shirts and robots. And so I think, one of the things that I have to show a customer early is you can't train your sales force in an hour session on the annual sales meeting. It ain't going to happen.
No, it won't.
It ain't gonna happen. And so that's one of the first realities I have to, for an executive, a CEO, president, owner, or even a sales manager executive, I have to get them to recognize if you want to change the culture here, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. It's going to require time investment, money investment, and it's going to require a sustained effort and reinforcement over time. And that's kind of sobering for some people, because they think of sales training as that 1 hour session at the sales meeting.
Yes. And you know, one of the things I find really interesting is what you just said. If I put my CEO hat on and listen to that and say, what you're telling me is it's going to be expensive. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money. And I don't like that because my job is to shepherd the resources of the company. And what you need to do is present the upside of that, which is if you get the culture thing right, it is worth insane amounts of resources because you can't buy good culture just right out of the box.
Well, and that's the next thing, once I smack them and across the head with this significant time and money investment to make the culture change, we then talk about ROI. Okay, let's calculate, we typically see a 30% increase in top line after the first year of training a sales team. And so for most companies, that's like that can take them from near chapter 11 to killing it. And so if I can walk through them, how they can, show them, demonstrate for them how they can make that kind of change for, a 1/5 or 1/10 the dollar investment, then it's pretty hard to argue with.
Right. Because you say, look, how much do you spend on X? And, a good example would, for most companies is advertising. How much do you spend on advertising? How much sales do they get you? Have you connected the two? Do you see what the ROI is there? And say, oh, we make a little more than we spend on advertising. It's worth it, right? And if you say, look, okay, now if we change the culture, if our training changes the culture of your sales team, and you can see this 30% increase, is that a better investment than what you're spending on advertising? Is yeah, but and that's the buts are of course the things you have to work with.
Yeah, I start with how much more could you do? How much more should you be selling if everything were firing on all 8 cylinders? And then from that number, I'm skeptical. So let's say they say it's $1 million. We should be doing $1 million more than we're doing. And I say, okay, let's get conservative. You say $1 million? Is it fair to say it's $500,000 conservatively? I mean, $500,000 is a slam dunk if you could resolve these challenges you have with your sales team. And when they say yes to that, and then I've got a solution, let's say it's for $100,000, it's kind of hard to argue investing $100,000 to get 500,000. And by the way, it doesn't just end the first year. It's 500,000 more, maybe $1 million more the year after that, maybe 2 million more after that. It's progressive. So it's not
like buying an annuity.
It's not just the first year ROI but I don't even have to say that. Once they start to look at, well, first year I get to pay this off 5 times. Well, why wouldn't I do that?
Yes. And so the challenge becomes one of taking their thinking from what can I do and see results this week to what can I do and see results this year or in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. And that's a tough one. But one of the things I always say to people is let's just shorten this up. What can I do to get my profits up this month? Guaranteed. All you have to do is shortchange your customers, screw your employees, and maybe not pay your suppliers as well, right? And all of those things will work this month. How will that work in 6 months or a year or 3 years? Yeah, it's not going to be good.
My experience is they typically mortgage this or next month by pulling it into this month, or next quarter by pulling it into this quarter. And then it becomes a game every quarter. They got to pull in next quarter's orders, and beg their customers to come in early so they can hit their number. And then it's just a death spiral.
Yes, exactly. And that, again, that's where, if you just drive on a very short period of numbers, then you're going to get short-term successes and long-term failures.
And tactical and not strategic. Tactical and not strategic.
Exactly. I mean, that's a fight I go through all the time because,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, what I do isn't terribly expensive compared to the benefits, and yet a lot of people see it as a big chunk, and they see people out there who do it for less. You
Mm,
know, you can hire Billy Bob who's done it, you know, 2 or 3 or 10 times, and that's, you know, that's cheaper. I've done it 2,500 times. You're just not going to find that anywhere in the world,
mm.
and yet people don't really value that. They just look at the price tag.
Yeah, and they have often a perspective about what kind of services you can provide them that's just not consistent with reality. They have maybe experienced a sales training or a planning consulting firm in the past that delivered a certain limited benefit, and they just assume you're the same. And so you gotta show them, hey, no, this is a little bit different. We're not gonna just dabble around the edges here. We're gonna go deep on this, and we're gonna help you first of all, diagnose what's really going on, and then prescribe stuff that might be a little painful to implement, but stuff that will give you a longer term cure. Is that fair to say, Robert?
Yeah, and the downside for you, and I face this too, is that you have to be willing to say, look, every once in a while, that pain is going to upset people.
Mm.
And you're not necessarily going to think it's all a bed of roses right out of the chute, or even, you know, even a year into it, you might not see it as a bed of roses. But if you are willing to go through that pain, the far side of this is fantastic performance.
Yeah, and culture and
Yeah,
spring in your step and maybe jumping out of bed in the morning
yeah.
if it's
And
frustrating right now, you know.
and I think the biggest challenge is it is the culture that is the biggest part of that and the biggest payoff too.
Mm.
Most people don't have an accounting number for the value of their culture, but I can tell you the value of culture is just incredible. If I compare companies with great cultures against companies with terrible cultures, um, the ones with terrible cultures might have larger sales volumes, but they have much lower profitability.
So
And I profitability is the key in my mind.
yeah, Robert, it just sounds like there's such a compliment for what we do together. How about we share a little bit about what's coming up for each of us, our company,
Sure,
and
absolutely.
what they might do to at least have a exploratory conversation with us.
Sure.
I've got a couple of things coming up. One is our sales development series training, the 100 course. It's a foundational course for training fundamentals, but it typically is attended by people who are already experienced salespeople, but need to refine and adopt and develop a process. So that's coming up April 8th, and it's 8-part series. The other thing that's coming up for us is I also do a management fundamentals, and it's not just for new managers, it's for existing managers who realize maybe they've been kind of winging it to this point, trying to do the best that they can, but would want to bring more of a process to their management function. And it is, you asked me earlier, is my management training more general management or more sales management? Well, it's both. I mean, it certainly there is a bias towards sales management, but within a small company that there's so those management functions are so woven together that it's appropriate for any manager, frontline manager.
Hmm. That's great. So that sounds like a very valuable series for some of my people. I will definitely make a mention of that in my blog. Um, for me right now, I've got 3 things going on. The first is I've been doing weekly webinars, and my plan is my next weekly webinar is going to be about restarting your strategic planning process. Because a lot of companies, you know, they did it 5 years ago, and then they said, okay, we're done, and it fell by the wayside. But in previous weeks, I did one on getting better implementation execution of your plans. I did one on a very powerful concept called strategic competencies and how you can really set yourself apart from your competition. And then I did one the week before on just how to get ready for strategic planning this year. So I do a different topic every week, and I usually just broadcast those to my blog audience, and that's all I do. The other two things I've got going on, one is I am relaunching our seminar, which we haven't done in public since the pandemic. And I'm not doing an in-person one though. I'm starting with just selling a video version of it, and I'm offering that again to my audience. And the third thing is we have just gotten a lot of feedback from clients and past clients about strategic planning and, hey, why did you drop the ball and things like that. And one of the things that came out very clearly to me is a different calendar for the process would work. So we are just next week launching a monthly strategic planning process where basically I get on Zoom with your team. You can't fly me out to your company unless you want to spend a lot of money, but I'll get on Zoom with your team once a month for 2 to 4 hours, and we'll do the whole strategic planning process of the year. But instead of spending days on it once a year, we're spreading it out and adding in the implementation tracking so that you don't just keep your plan fresh and keep it alive, but you also make sure you get the follow through. And that's really important, because when I look at the companies that have had that great follow through that I've worked with in the past 5 years, I've seen profit increases of over $50 billion with those companies.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you could get a chunk of that in your company, why wouldn't you want to keep it alive and keep it going?
Of course. I mean, a lot of what both of us deliver to our customers to get full benefit requires a sustained effort. It requires ongoing reinforcement. And that's really kind of built into the model that I think it sounds like both of our firms emphasize and implement.
And I'm sure that a lot of your customers, though, they don't want to think about it that way when they show up. They want to buy
Yeah.
the thing in a box.
Quick fix. And they're
Yeah.
hoping they can get a quick fix, and they come in with the attitude that it's an expense and not an investment. And that's the thing we've got to show them. It's really about an investment in their firm, in their people, in their culture, and their customers. And everybody, if they're doing it right, everybody wins. So, that's what I love about it. And that's what makes me jump out of bed in the morning is knowing that I've helped my clients. Well, I know at least one, General Motors made $1 billion off of my influence. But
Great.
Beyond them, it's mostly millions of dollars for my customers.
Well, it's hard to do $1 billion if you're a $50 million company. So
yeah, exactly. And it's easy to do $1 billion if you're the second largest institution in the world, right?
Yes. Well, I don't know if it's easy, but it's possible.
It's possible. It's within the realm of possibility. Yes.
Exactly.
So it sounds like we could potentially work together with certain clients, and so I'm open to that, Robert, if you are. And I'm just going to share right now how people can get a hold of me, and then and if you would do the same. My email address is joe.marr@sandler.com. That's SANDLER.com. And I'll give you my cell phone number, 734-883-9300. And that's in the US of A. If you're calling, you need a country code. How about you, Robert?
My email address is RBradford@CSSP.com. That's Center for Simplified Strategic Planning.com. And my cell phone number is area code 734, also 929-8846 in the US. Add a 1 if you're calling from outside. But also that is my WhatsApp. If you want to reach me via WhatsApp, you can use that number and reach me.
Yeah, and you can text me as well at that number. So, well, I appreciate Robert, you invest in the time, and any other questions or closing comments before we move on?
Not particularly. I have a lot of other questions I'd love to cover with you just about the relationship between strategy and the sales process, but we can cover that in another call.
Okay, let's do another session.
All right.
Enjoyed that, Robert. Thank you.
Thanks a bunch.